Hey, what's up guys? In this video, I'm gonna give you 10 tips for how to write the perfect blog post. Check it out. Okay, so the worst thing you could ever do when you're blogging is when you're starting to write, try and figure out what you're gonna write. You wanna have some idea of what it is that you're gonna be talking about and writing about before you even get to the point at which you start writing. The last thing you want is that blank cursor just kind of staring you in the face, like, what are you gonna write about? What are you gonna write about? What are you gonna write about? That's what I feel like it's saying all the time. So I try to avoid that as much as possible. So there's a few things involved with this. First is you wanna make sure that you understand what it is that you're writing about in your whole content calendar. Hopefully you have a list of topics that you are going to cover, questions that you're going to answer. Those are typically things that you'd wanna talk about on your blog. And maybe you surveyed your audience, or maybe you know what the hot topics are. Those are things you should talk about. But the number one tip I have for you, and this is actually tip number one, is to try and understand what the transformation is that you want your audience to have after they read this blog post. So they're in one area of their life, or they're thinking one way, they read your blog post and they come out of it transformed. Now, it's just a fancy way to say, well, what's the purpose of this particular blog post that you're writing? But I love thinking about the transformation because that takes the focus off of you and puts it directly on your target audience. And when you think about the transformation, this will help for the next tip. It helps you outline that blog post even better. All right, and tip number two, once you have that transformation in mind, you can then work backwards from that transformation and create your outline. Now, it doesn't matter how you end up creating your outline. You can do it using a mind map. I like to use Post-it notes. But however you choose to do it, just make sure that you take these ideas in your head about this particular transformation and you just put them all out there on paper or on Post-it notes or in a mind map, and then that'll help you be able to organize and create this outline that you have, which is essentially going to be the skeleton for your blog post. It's again, the last thing you want to do after you start writing is to think, okay, well, where do I want to go with this, or what's coming next? Have that outline in place beforehand. Work backwards from that transformation. And what I mean about that, what I mean by that is actually, okay, you have this end goal with what you want to accomplish with this blog post. What are the supporting points you need to make? What are the supporting case studies that you have? What are some stories that you can tell that will then lead people into this transformation? So again, the transformation is sort of like the address you put in that navigation system in your car, right? That's the end goal. The outline are the directions to get there. So using those different tools, create that outline, it's gonna be much easier for you. Now, it doesn't matter what kind of content you're creating, whether it's a blog post, a podcast episode, or maybe even you're speaking on stage. The number one thing you have to realize is that you need to start strong. People are gonna go there because they're gonna be interested in either you or the topic, and unless you hook them in the beginning, they're not going to want to continue on. The purpose of the intro of your blog post is to keep people reading. The purpose of the first sentence is to get them to read the second sentence, and so on. So start strong. Well, how do you do that? Well, there's a number of different ways to do that. Personally, I love to start with a story. Human beings we're somehow tuned to just get engulfed in and engaged when a story is being told. So I like telling a story, something that is relatable to who that transformation audience is. I also love to ask and propose certain questions that might induce curiosity, or you can start out with a really interesting fact or interesting concept that may be unheard of before. Again, all these things are things that are going to get people to just continue to read on and pay attention and actually have them realize that there is something worth reading here. Okay, so tip number 4, before we start talking more about what should be included in the blog post, I think you might have you might be wondering, well, where do you write these blog posts? Do you open up WordPress and write in there? And that's actually something I would recommend against, because I've written so many times blog posts in WordPress, drafts, and then for whatever reason, I click publish or save, and then WordPress crashes. I lose all my work, hours of work. And so I wouldn't recommend publishing in WordPress. What I use now is a Google Doc. So I use Google Docs simply because for one, it's free, it's easily accessible, and it's shareable, and also they autosave, which is really handy. And you can organize your content as you go and keep them into separate folders, into different categories and all that sort of stuff. It makes it really easy to find later, and it's all there for you in your Google Docs. So I would recommend using Google Docs. If you have another preferred WordPress processor, that's totally fine. I just wouldn't recommend writing and drafting in WordPress itself. After you're done writing and after you have it edited or whatever, you then can take that content and put it into WordPress. And even if it does crash, you actually have that content elsewhere anyway. Now, the other tip I would recommend as you're creating your first draft, actually a couple things. One, just write. Don't worry about editing right now. The worst thing you can do is put on your edit brain while you have your creative brain on. And when you do that, you stop yourself from being creative. So just you know, this is a tip that I learned when I was writing my first book, because it was a big struggle for me. I was trying to edit the book as I was going, and it was just a slow and very frustrating process. Same thing with blog posts. Write it all out, get it all out there. As they say, just throw it all up, and then you can clean it up later and find the good pieces. That sounds weird, but don't actually throw up and scour through what it is that came out of you. That's okay. I'm going too far here, but we're going to keep this because this is real life. But anyway, another thing I want to share with you is just be you. Just like I just mentioned there, I crack jokes. I'm weird sometimes, and that's just who I am. So be you in your blog post. You don't have to become a professor when you're, you know, a lot of people, they get into a mindset when they're starting a blog post that they have to feel like they're a university professor writing a thesis or something like that. Don't do that. Be you, right, in the way that you talk. That's how people respond best to. Now, if you are a professor or something, then that's how you write. Well, then good for you. But if not, like me, I speak and write very basic, and that's how people respond. So you could do the same. Don't worry about trying to be somebody you're not. Just be you. All right, tip number 5. Your title and description. These are really important components of your blog post, because these are things that people will see before they get to your blog post. If people search for these items in Google, they're going to find the title and be able to read the description beforehand. And this has to deal with SEO, or what's also known as search engine optimization. And in order to really give yourself the best chance to be found organically through search engines like Google, you want to make sure that the title is relevant to what it is that you're talking about, for one, but also generates curiosity, and is also something that kind of makes people want to click. Because when you think about it, when you search for something in Google, you look at the title first typically, and then you might read the description. If those things aren't interesting, nobody's going to click through. And obviously you want them to be related to what you are actually talking about in the blog post, because if people go on that page and they realize that they're not finding what they had hoped they would find, they would leave. That counts as what's called a bounce in typical analytics programs, meaning people come to the page, they don't see what they like, and they leave right away. That actually works against you and can derank your page or actually move it down in the ranking. So again, let's keep it super simple. Make the title great and relevant and interesting, and make the description descriptive. There, that's all you have to do. I wouldn't worry too much at this stage about keywords. I mean, you can include keywords that you know people related to this particular topic are going to type in, but don't do what's called keyword stuffing and try to add that keyword in there like 100 times. Don't do that, because Google knows. And so just write for humans, and also come at it from a perspective of, if somebody found this blog post on Google, what would make them want to click through? And just be real. All right, tip number 6. Make your blog post scannable. Now, what do I mean by that? I mean, don't make it one large paragraph the entire time. Now, that sounds kind of obvious, right? You don't want to just have a giant paragraph. And why don't we want that? We don't want that because it's hard on our eyes and it's difficult to read. And even if it's great content, people aren't going to want to get through it because they don't have time to breathe. And that's essentially what you're doing here. You're giving your readers time to breathe by creating different sections. So going back to your outline, each particular segment of your outline could be its own part that is divided with a subheader or a header. By header, I mean just kind of like a mini title within the middle of your blog post that kind of denotes that new section. When people get to that as they're reading, it gives them space to breathe. And plus, like I said earlier, it makes your content scannable. A lot of people online, when they read, they scan. They look for headers and different sections that are bolded and italicized that are relevant to them. So the more you do that, the easier it's going to be to read, and the more professional your blog post will look for the internet audience. All right, tip number 7. Now, don't go overboard with this one. Some people do, but try to include visuals in your blog post. Images, videos even, graphs, charts, and all kinds of things to support the points that you're making in your blog post. Now, as I said earlier, you can go overboard with this, but what I would do is actually, as you're putting these things and sprinkling them throughout your blog post, make sure you actually look at the preview of your blog post. You can click in WordPress and many other blogging platforms a preview button to see what this thing looks like, so you can see if they're placed correctly, or if it makes sense. Now, the number one thing is you want to make sure that these images are actually relevant and support what it is you're talking about. Don't just add sort of random images. Now, what I love about images is it breaks up the content in a similar way that we talked about in the last tip. It allows people to breathe while they're reading and gives them something nice to look at. But I love it also because it makes, almost on a subconscious level, something memorable for these people as they're reading through, so they can come back to it later. And these visuals, you know, we very much learn in a very visual way, so doing those things to enhance the content are going to be really beneficial for you and helps you stand out from other people who are talking about and writing about the same thing. All right, tip number 8, and this is a massively important one, especially if you want to get results with the blogging that you're doing, and that is make sure to include a call to action in your blog post. Doesn't necessarily have to be only at the end though. I would obviously recommend putting one at the end, but that same call to action can be throughout your blog post too. Maybe you have a lead magnet or something you're giving away. Don't just mention it at the end of your blog post, you can mention it throughout. Maybe there's a specific thing you want people to do, like a challenge, or maybe even do something like subscribe. You can do that a few times during your blog post, but call to actions are really important because it's a way for your audience to get even more involved with you and what you're doing. And the more you can get them involved in participating, subscribing, doing all those kinds of things, having these little mini transactions with you, they're gonna lead to bigger and bigger and bigger transactions with you down the road, whatever that might mean, whether it's a product you're selling or an event that you're putting on, doesn't matter. These little transactions matter a lot though. So call to actions, or CTAs as sometimes people call them, put them into your blog post and don't be afraid to ask because you're providing a ton of great value here. Remember, you're transforming people's ways of thinking and transforming their lives with whatever it is that you're teaching. You have a right to ask for them to do something. Now, obviously, you can go overboard with this too, and the more you ask, you eventually get to that line where it's like, okay, buddy, you're asking a little bit too much from me. So that's why I recommend one, if not only up to 2 different kinds of call to actions within a blog post. And you'll have more opportunities the more blog posts you write for other call to actions too. But again, really important, please include call to actions in your blog post. Even if the blog post doesn't necessarily call for a call to action, it could be as simple as, hey, what do you like? Leave a comment and tell me what you think about this, or have you ever experienced something like this? Tell me about it. Again, getting your audience engaged in that way is going to be very important for you to having longevity in your brand and building those raving fans. Okay, tip number 9, we're almost at the end here. Proofread. Please proofread, and proofread out loud. I cannot stress how important this tip is, and I know it's kind of weird to say out loud what you've just written, especially if you're by yourself or even if there's other people there with you, but I swear I catch so many mistakes when I'm reading it out loud versus when I just read it in my head. When you read it out loud, it's fantastic. And if you can't afford an editor to come on board and copy edit your stuff, this is the best way to save a ton of hassle with having to change things later. And of course, the grammar police is out there. Your audience is going to be like hawks sometimes. And so just expect that. I still am not perfect. And even though I do have an editor now, they miss a few things here and there. It's okay, but give yourself the best chance to come out with the best quality content you can by proofreading out loud before you hit that publish button. I would also recommend, if you have the opportunity, to have a friend or even a family member read through the post, somebody else besides you read through it to see if it just makes sense, to catch any other mistakes. Oftentimes we need another set of eyes to just see stuff that we can't see ourselves because we're so deep into our own content. So please proofread. It doesn't take very long and it makes a world of a difference. Okay, and tip number 10 to finish off, we've been talking about creating the perfect blog post. Well, I'm here to tell you that there is no such thing as the perfect blog post. If you try and strive for perfection, you're actually going to just delay yourself from putting stuff out there that will help people. So stop trying to be perfect. You're going to make mistakes. I continue to make mistakes, but I give myself the best chance to put the best stuff out there, and I learn as I go, which is obviously what you guys are doing right now. So take all these tips, put them into action, and realize that you're going to have to hit publish anyway, and it might not be perfect when you do that. You can always make changes later, and as long as you're learning as you go, that's what matters. Stop worrying about being perfect. You're just procrastinating and not even providing value to people, because the more that fear gets in the way, the less you're going to help people and the less results you're going to get. So just hit publish. After you do this, after you proofread all this stuff we talked about, just hit publish. Do not worry about being perfect. All right, so I hope you enjoyed those 10 tips for creating the perfect blog post. And I would recommend that you check out all the other links below that I have for you for some more blogging tips. So I look forward to hearing from you. If you have a comment to share, please do. If you have a blog up and running already and you're using some of these tips, or even if you have other tips to share with the community, feel free to leave those below and keep blogging. A lot of people need you out there.